When you hear Florida, what images flood your mind? Perhaps theme park castles piercing synthetic skis, neon-lit beach strips humming with spring break revelry, retirement communities manicured into geometric perfection. These are the postcards, the carefully curated illusions that mask something far more profound. But what if I told you that beneath this glittering veneer lies one of the most primordial, ecologically vital, and spiritually humbling wilderness systems on the North American continent? This isn't the Florida of headlines and hashtags. This is the Florida that predates human ambition by millennia, a living, breathing testament to forces that dwarf our grandest architectural achievements. Here, in places most visitors never glimpse, ancient waters carve invisible pathways through limestone older than human memory. Forests breathe in rhythms measured not by clocks, but by centuries. Creatures walk corridors of survival so narrow that their very existence becomes a meditation on resilience. And if you're ready to discover landscapes that demand not just your attention, but your reverence, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. The journeys we're taking together will change how you see not just Florida, but the very relationship between civilization and the wild. Florida exists as geography's greatest paradox, a peninsula marketed as humanity's playground, yet governed entirely by forces that recognize no human authority whatsoever. Stretching nearly 450 miles from the Georgia border to the scattered islands of the Keys, this 65,758 square mile contradiction floats like a limestone raft between the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean, its highest natural point barely reaching 345 feet above sea level. This is a land built not on bedrock, but on the skeletal remains of ancient coral reefs and marine organisms compressed over 25 million years, creating a foundation so porous that it functions less like solid ground and more like a calcified sponge. The economic narrative of modern Florida, valued at over $1.1 trillion GDP and housing 22 million residents, tells a story of conquest. Spanish conquistadors claiming it in 1513, British colonial ambitions trading it like currency, American statehood achieved in 1845, and the great drainage projects of the early 1900s that promised to reclaim millions of acres for agriculture and development. Yet every hurricane season, every summer deluge, every drought-induced wildfire whispers the same uncomfortable truth. This land was never ours to reclaim. We are temporary guests in a system engineered by water, time, and evolutionary pressure spanning epochs. Venture beyond the coastal glitter into Florida's interior, and you encounter a landscape sculpted by different values entirely. Here, in places like the Green Swamp or the Ocala National Forest, silence becomes tactile, a humid, heavy presence that settles on your skin like Spanish moss draping ancient cypress limbs. This is wilderness functioning as authority, operating on schedules measured in wet seasons and dry, in gradual succession from pine flatwoods to hardwood hammocks, in the patient accumulation of peat over centuries. Stand in a palmetto prairie stretching to horizons blurred by heat shimmer, and human achievement shrinks to irrelevance. These inland ecosystems, vast, flat, seemingly monotonous to the untrained eye, are precisely calibrated instruments regulating water flow, filtering nutrients, providing habitat for species found nowhere else on Earth. The scrub jay, dependent on ancient sand dunes deposited when Florida was a chain of islands. The gopher tortoise, whose burrows shelter over 350 other species. The longleaf pine, once covering 90 million acres across the southeast, now reduced to fragments, its wiregrass understory requiring fire to regenerate, fire that human development has spent a century suppressing. This interior Florida refuses spectacle. It demands observation, patience, and the humility to recognize that drama here unfolds in increments. A pitcher plant slowly dissolving its insect prey, a wood stalk stalking through shallow wetlands with prehistoric deliberation, cabbage palms standing sentinel over landscapes that have known mastodon and saber-toothed cat. The frontier that persists here is temporal, not spatial, a threshold between human time and geological time, between quarterly earnings reports and processes unfolding across millennia. At the ecological heart of Peninsula Florida flows the Everglades. Though flows, hardly captures the almost imperceptible southward drift of water across a limestone plain so flat that elevation drops mere inches per mile over a 100-mile journey. This is not swamp, but river, a 60-mile-wide sheet of freshwater originating at the Kissimmee River Basin, filtering through Lake Okeechobee and creeping with agonizing patience toward Florida Bay. Before human engineering, severed arteries, and erected barriers, this system moved 3 trillion gallons of water annually, creating the largest subtropical wilderness in North America. The genius of the Everglades lies in motion so subtle it appears stationary. Sawgrass prairies ripple under wind that carries the salt-tinged promise of distant seas. Tree islands, teardrop-shaped hammocks of hardwood forest oriented by water flow like compass needles pointing south, provide elevated refuge during wet season floods. Alligator holes, excavated and maintained through dry months, become critical water sources for deer, wading birds, fish, and the alligators themselves, transforming solitary predators into inadvertent ecosystem engineers. Water here is character, not setting. It filters through periphyton, a living mat of algae and microorganisms that oxygenates, purifies, and feeds the base of a food web, supporting everything from mosquitofish to endangered Everglades snails. It sustains over 360 bird species, including the roseate spoonbill, whose salmon-pink plumage results from carotenoids concentrated through this aquatic food chain. It cradles the American crocodile and the manatee, provides hunting grounds for the wood stork and the snail kite, and hosts the ghost orchid, a plant so rare, so specific in its requirements, that its continued existence becomes a barometer for the entire system's health. The Everglades operates on binary time: wet and dry, flood and fire, abundance and scarcity. From May through October, thunderstorms born over heated landscape deliver 60 inches of annual rainfall, swelling the water sheet, triggering massive breeding cycles in wadding birds, time to prey concentrations in receding pools. From November through April, drought rules, water retreats, mud cracks into geometric patterns, wildfires race through sawgrass, releasing nutrients locked in accumulated vegetation, clearing the stage for the cycle to repeat. Human intervention disrupted this ancient rhythm with catastrophic consequences. The Central and Southern Florida Flood Control Project, constructed after the devastating hurricanes of 1926 and 1928 killed thousands, erected 1,400 miles of canals and levees designed to drain, divert, and control. Suddenly, water that should have crept south flowed east to sprawling coastal cities. Agricultural interests claimed northern Everglades marshes for sugarcane, converting wetlands to plantations that leached phosphorus pollution into remaining natural areas, triggering algal blooms and choking native vegetation with invasive cattails. The results read like ecological obituary. Wadding bird populations plummeted by 90% from historic levels. Florida Bay's seagrass beds collapsed, starving manatees and decimating sport fisheries worth billions. The entire system, once a self-regulating masterpiece, became dependent on human water managers making daily decisions about when and where to release water, a responsibility for which we remain catastrophically unequipped. Yet restoration efforts since the 1990s, including the comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan authorized in 2000 at a projected cost exceeding $10 billion, represent something revolutionary: restraint as remedy. The goal isn't to impose new solutions, but to remove old impositions, filling canals, purchasing agricultural land, re-establishing sheet flow. This is conservation as surrender, acknowledging that the best thing human ingenuity can do is step back and let ancient processes resume. Southwest of the main Everglades expanse lies Big Cypress National Preserve, 729,000 acres of primordial forest where importance vastly exceeds visibility. Unlike the open sawgrass vistas, Big Cypress crowds close, bald cypress trees rising from tannin-stained water, their knobby pneumatophores breathing roots, creating abstract sculptures across flooded prairies/pine islands. dense strands of pond apple and pop ash forming nearly impenetrable thickets where sunlight filters to perpetual twilight. This landscape functions as hydrological guardian, slowly releasing water southward to the 10,000 islands and the mangrove estuaries where freshwater meets Gulf saltwater in a brackish marriage that sustains one of the hemisphere's most productive marine nurseries. Remove Big Cypress, and the Everglades downstream would collapse, a truth that makes this forest's preservation not aesthetic preference but ecological necessity. Within Big Cypress's deepest recesses walks the Florida panther, a subspecies of cougar reduced to perhaps 120 to 230 adults, occupying the last wild fragments of South Florida. Each panther requires 200 square miles of territory for hunting white-tailed deer, wild hogs, and smaller prey. Each demands contiguous forest connecting wetlands to uplands. Each faces highways bisecting ancestral ranges, genetic bottlenecks from historic population collapse, and the inexorable pressure of development converting habitat to housing at rates that make survival a daily negotiation. The panther transforms abstract conservation into flesh and blood. These tawny ghosts, averaging 130 pounds for males, moving through palmetto thickets with liquid silence, represent not just charismatic megafauna, but the apex of an entire ecosystem's health. Where panthers persist, prey populations remain balanced, mesopredators like raccoons stay checked, and habitat connectivity enables movement of countless other species from black bears to songbirds. Navigate the narrow waterways threading through Big Cypress, and you enter a spatial relationship with silence rarely experienced in contemporary life. This isn't mere absence of sound but presence, a fullness composed of subtle elements easily overwhelmed by human noise. The drip of water from paddle blade, the rustle of wind through needle palm fronds, the prehistoric grunt of an alligator asserting territorial claim, the splashing strike of a largemouth bass ambushing prey. The cypress tunnels themselves become architectural, overhead canopies interlacing to create Gothic arches, roots and knees forming natural columns, air thick with humidity that softens light to Renaissance glow. In these moments, human identity recedes. The endless internal monologue quiets. Awareness expands beyond the boundaries of individual consciousness to encompass the system itself. The capillary network of roots exchanging nutrients through fungal intermediaries, the invisible respiration of trees releasing moisture that seeds afternoon thunderstorms, the patient accumulation of organic matter building substrate for future forests. Journey north to Crystal River and descend into the crystalline waters of Three Sisters Springs, and Florida's true architecture reveals itself. These springs, along with hundreds of others puncturing the peninsula, represent emergence points for the Floridan Aquifer, a vast underground limestone reservoir stretching beneath all of Florida and portions of Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. Formed over 20 to 30 million years as slightly acidic rainwater dissolved soluble limestone, this system holds quadrillions of gallons of some of North America's purest freshwater. The springs discharge 64-degree water year-round at rates measuring millions of gallons daily, creating ecosystems as alien as they are mesmerizing. Eelgrass waves in gentle currents, freshwater sponges coat submerged logs, and every winter manatees, those rotund marine mammals incapable of tolerating water below 68 degrees, congregate by the hundreds in these thermal refuges, their bulk displacing water as they jostle for position near spring vents. At Terracea Preserve, the narrative meets saltwater. Here, along Tampa Bay's eastern shore, 1,700 acres of mangrove forest, salt marsh, and tidal creek demonstrate nature's capacity for reclamation when human pressure relents. Once slated for development, now preserved, these wetlands function as transition zone, neither wholly terrestrial nor entirely aquatic, but something fluid, negotiating between extremes with every tidal pulse. The mangroves themselves, red, black, and white species occupying precise salinity gradients, engineer stability from chaos. Their tangled prop roots trap sediment, build land, buffer storm surge, and create nursery habitat for juvenile snook, tarpon, redfish, and countless invertebrates that form the base of commercial fisheries worth billions annually. At high tide, water floods through the forest, bringing nutrients and flushing waste. At low tide, mudflats emerge, feeding grounds for roseate spoonbills, reddish egrets, and wood stalks probing for crustaceans with specialized bills honed by millions of years of selective pressure. Human absence here, no boardwalks, no interpretive signs, minimal infrastructure, allows the land to speak in its own voice. That voice speaks of impermanence, of boundaries as illusion, of life adapted to extremes of salinity, temperature, and inundation that would kill most terrestrial organisms. It speaks too of resilience, mangrove forests recovering from oil spills, hurricanes, and development impacts when given even marginal opportunity. The Overseas Highway, a 113-mile ribbon of concrete leaping from key to key, represents both engineering triumph and philosophical hubble. Constructed largely in the 1930s atop the abandoned Florida East Coast Railway, destroyed by the catastrophic 1935 Labor Day hurricane, the strongest ever to strike the United States. This road promises to conquer geography while simultaneously underscoring human fragility. At mile marker 0, where Whitehead Street terminates at the Gulf of Mexico, you reach the southernmost point of the continental United States, though technically, Ballast Key holds that distinction by a few miles. Key West exists as pure contradiction, Ernest Hemingway's literary refuge and tourist party destination, military outpost and artist colony, six-toed cat sanctuary, and cruise ship port. Here, 25,000 permanent residents share 4x2-mile coral limestone with millions of annual visitors seeking something they often cannot articulate, perhaps permission to be unmoored, to exist at geography's edge where conventional rules dissolve into tropical ambiguity. Yet beneath the reverie pulses ecological reality. The surrounding waters, part of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, established in 1990, protect the only living coral barrier reef in North America. These reefs, built by organisms barely visible individually yet capable of engineering structures visible from space, demonstrate collaboration across incomprehensible timescales. Stony corals growing millimeters annually. Parrotfish scraping algae and depositing sand that builds beaches. Nurse sharks patrolling seagrass beds, where at night, spiny lobsters emerge from crevices in choreographed movements determined by lunar cycles. Florida, properly understood, becomes sanctuary for the primordial, a laboratory where ancient processes continue their patient work, indifferent to quarterly profits or electoral cycles. The wilderness here isn't disappearing, it's waiting, watching with the infinite patience of systems measuring success in millennia, ready to reclaim every abandoned development, to flood every drained marsh, to outlast every temporary civilization foolish enough to believe it has achieved permanence. If this journey moved something in you, subscribe to join our community of explorers seeking not just destinations, but deeper understanding. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next adventure into the wild places that still remember who they were before we arrived.